Welcome to Living Liberation with psychologist Dr. Narissa Williams. Living Liberation invites you into discussion about how we embody liberation individually and collectively. We explore liberation in our relationships, school, and work contexts, and in society at large. We challenge and cultivate thinking that moves us all towards collective liberation. So hello, today we have with us Dr. DeLeon Gray. And so I'm going to ask you in a minute to introduce yourself, but I'll share my introduction with Dr. Gray. So Dr. Gray is an educational psychologist. You have to fill in the gaps, right? You're also a statistician and has done research on belonging in schools, specifically through a racial lens, so Black and belonging within schools, and has done some great things that he can share with us from a very research-based standpoint, as well as a practical standpoint. And what I love about Dr. Gray, and that I think you will hear in this conversation, is that all of his work and all of his approach is very person-centered and very aligned with the liberation principles that we've been learning about. So welcome, Dr. Gray.
Thank you so much for having me. So you asked me to say a little bit about myself in addition to your introduction. So I am CEO of Black and Belonging, and we work hand in hand with educators, with students, with school leaders, and with policymakers to disrupt structural aspects of schooling that leave marginalized students vulnerable to anxieties about belonging. And so the way we do this is through programming directly with young people. We put them at the table in conversations that we're having. We bring them into spaces that they're normally not in, whether it's at the table during policy discussions, co-presenting with us during teacher professional developments, or even to national research workshops. And we support them in speaking for themselves. But we also do a lot of work with educators in building out frameworks that are education-centered, student-focused, and are customized to specific educational settings. And that includes building out surveys with teachers, with students, and designing things that are relevant to them in their schools. So that is my spiel. But I also add that I am an associate professor of educational psychology and equity at North Carolina State University. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So what brought you to this work? They always say research is me search, right? So what brought you to this work?
Well, there are a couple of things. Probably the biggest thing that has brought me to my work is my experiences in elementary school. So I went to elementary school on Howard's campus. They had a school called Gage Eckington University at the time. And so I would see so many college students walking around, and they just looked like bigger people with backpacks. They would come visit our classrooms, and the partnerships were very, very solid. And I got to see what community engagement really looked like for professors and people at a university in an authentic way. Unfortunately, my experiences after that didn't have those same level of strong partnerships. And I noticed that there was a gap in the information that was provided from academia, sometimes to schools, and also a gap that was present just in terms of presence of academics inside of school environments. And so I think about my belonging work, but I think about the idea of being in solidarity with communities first. Belonging is one of the most central, fundamental aspects of who we are. It makes us all human. But, just because belonging is important cognitively, developmentally, socially, emotionally, doesn't mean that we have truly uncovered the way belonging is uniquely expressed among different cultural groups. And so I developed a framework called Black and Belonging to really unpack what that meant for Black students inside of schools. Because when we put everybody together and speak about serving everybody, we develop policies that are more generic. And that means that certain groups fall through the cracks and aren't served specifically in ways that allow them to shine.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I didn't even know that piece about Howard campus. I was born at Howard University Hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my mother and father were students for like a year there. So interesting. So interesting. Also interesting is that something that we do talk about in this course is, and we don't even get into it too much. So I like that you have this lived experience of this community partnership with a school, as well as this, your professional experience now. Is that some of the work that you do now?
Yes, absolutely. So now I have a couple of things going inside of schools right now. So the biggest thing is we have professional development that one of our high school seniors is leading tomorrow, where he'll be teaching his teachers how to affirm him based on data that he collected inside of his own school on the topic of belonging. He's presented this research at the American Educational Research Association's conference. He's presented it at Duke University's campus. And so his principal attending those events invited him to share out his perspectives so that we can develop a model that supports educators within the school to develop more students who not only consult with educators, but lead the conversation through data informed processing and decision making. And so, but he's one of about 10 students that we work with closely at the middle school and high school level. So we've developed a group of fellows, and sometimes it's really important to sow a seed into students' futures. And so our fellows are paid scholars who develop content, whether it's audiovisual content or it is, written blogs related to belonging from their own perspectives. They pushed on issues such as Black girls' hair experiences outside of schools, hoodies, the notion of centering their culture and community inside of lessons, and also just ways to allow students to self-express and to have fun without being silenced inside of schools. And so they have a lot of different policy messages that they're putting forth, and they span students who are athletes, students who are singers, artists, and those who just want to share out and be social media influencers. So it's a small, intimate group, but they are leaders in their schools and their communities.
I love this. So those who are interested, I did look at the mixtape. Those who are interested in seeing just a snippet of that on Dr. Gray's website, blackandbelonging.com, you can see like little, you can get a glimpse of, or a feel of what the students are doing. And so this is like such an empowerment approach, such an empowered, such a liberated, such a social justice oriented kind of approach that goes against the disempowering systems that these youth are developing. And so I love it that much more. And I also love it because I feel like there's a whole lot of theorizing about how this should happen, but you don't see it. You don't hear it as much, right? What were some of the things that, like, what do you see? Like what these students that go through that you all provide this opportunity for, like from start to finish, what do they look like by the time they finish?
So by the time they finish, the goal is to make their resumes explode. That's what I tell them, right? But it's really hard to lock students in sometimes to something that doesn't currently exist traditionally. We have athletics, which I love. I was an athlete in high school and college. We have, band. We have other types of extracurriculars that students do, but there's no lane for students who, let's say, might say, I want to be a social media influencer when I grow up. I think it's a huge missed opportunity when we look at social media only in terms of the bad and what harm it can do without looking at the upside. It's developing entrepreneurs, it's developing people who are public speakers, people who have a following, people who are able to put themselves out there and speak and share ideas and perspectives. And these are the types of things that we want when we think about traditional ways of assessing students, like in terms of college and career readiness and other types of skills that we want them to learn. So we have to lean into where they are, and social media is one of the biggest vehicles for doing so. So I kind of allow students to grapple with the question, what would it mean to make a video that shares a message that is a positive message that if you saw it on TikTok, you wouldn't scroll past? What would it mean to make this message? And then when I show the video to their peers, I just ask the question, is this something that you would swipe past, or is this something that you would look at? It's a different way of approaching a traditional academic task or activity. So when I think about one of the biggest things that we do is we take students who might start out reading a traditional message out about Black history where they like hold their, paper to their face and they say, in 1960, blah, Martin Luther King was ... And that's how they give a traditional academic report. And by the end of it, they are in front of professors, deans, superintendents, their principals, and community leaders sharing their perspectives and their voices. So, by starting with them in their middle school years and working with them to their high school years, they get a chance to evolve and know that their voices really matter in a real way. Take this high school freshman. She just got out of middle school, so she was working with us for a while. And we used the videos as a way to give them confidence, to affirm them, to say, hey, look, people are watching your videos. You have a message to share. So why don't you share that same message in person? So they come kind of prepared. But in that process, she was nervous the other day. She said, man, I really need to work on my public speaking. It's so important. I thought about it as just for class, and I never want to talk when my teachers are talking. But, people were looking at me and I just wanted to hide, but I know that's not what I can do. And so when is the next time I just get to redeem myself? Because I can do better if I practiced for real. I think those real world settings and exposure settings are huge, but I also think it's also an opportunity for them to network and get their personal brands out. So, we work with them on collecting their own data, doing deep dives into the history of their communities and culture. But most importantly, we put them in a space where they can just talk to each other and vibe and give feedback in their own authentic way to one another. So it looks like engaging them in Black History video challenges at the very beginning, and then telling them, hey, they can do better than that. Let's make a video now that's not just internally, but for the public, so you're iterating on what you've done before. And then we bring them into opportunities to talk in person at their school, and then take them outside of their school to university settings, and then take them to national conferences and other spaces where they can speak, out to larger audiences. And by that point, they're ready to co-present with us in teacher professional development workshops.
I love it. I love it. So, okay. And it sounds like there's a lot of benefit, so concrete skill development, but also in terms of building competence. And this young lady sounded like she was able to self-assess. And she's on, and motivation. I know motivation is a lot of what you look at too, in your research. So I really like to hear that. So is this an after school program? How do they do this?
So it's after school primarily, but we also work with teachers as well. So the way we identify students is we might start off a project just for class, and we try to tell students nothing you do is just for class. Take, for example, a professional development that we did around belonging, where we developed a set of instructional activities that could be done in a STEM elective course, so a career and technical education course that students would take. And this lesson was on this idea of design and modeling a tiny house. So we asked students, what issues in your community really need to be addressed? Lack of Section 8 vouchers, the housing boom in the Raleigh-Durham area, homelessness came up, or even just affordable housing came up as issues. So now that they're locked into these communal reasons why, tiny houses could be helpful. So let's build something with your target population in mind. They went through the process of building these together in teams collectively. And so their teachers were scouting during this process to say, all right, some of y'all are really killing it. Y'all really got into this. Let's take the same idea and now let's develop a school of the future. They developed the school of the future. They entered into a contest. Locally, they won. Regionally, they won. They made it to the national level and placed nationally. And we're flying out to Chicago. So then after going there, me, the teachers, and the students say, all right, cool. Well, now that we know what it's really like to be in this environment where you're presenting in front of all white architects at a national level, on a national stage, yeah, y'all got blown out of the water, but y'all made it here, and y'all are only Black and brown kids in this whole building. So now we can build a super team across multiple schools where we do the same training with educators, they implement the lessons, and now we bring those students together. That next year they won locally, regionally, and made it to the national level, and then they won and were able to go to Disneyland for free and also present in front of architects there. And so, it's an example of them, showcasing their brilliance in non-traditional ways, and us not necessarily boxing them into one space where they can advocate for the way schools should be designed for young people. So it spans architecture, it spans farming, it spans, just teacher PDs, et cetera. So all this to say that although there were only 4 kids who made it to this national competition, we brought those kids back. We created a mini documentary of their experiences. brought them back to North Carolina State University and invited a bunch of their peers to campus for a field trip. We showed the video and allowed students to have a panel conversation with their peers about the experience. These kids said, hey, look, my school has a failing grade, a D or F. And so the public perception is nobody from our school can do anything, but y'all just showed us it's possible that we can do this. My mind is blown. People can't talk bad about my school anymore. So it's about disrupting the narratives and the perceptions by showing the brilliance that students possess in these non-traditional ways of achieving that, exist outside of standardized test scores and other ways that, achievement has been weaponized against our young people.
I love this, right? And so in this, I can hear so much of how, so I'm hearing it and I'm like, wow, we never had anything like that in the schools that I went to, or schools that my soon to be 17-year-old son went to, these opportunities. And so now I'm going to take it back because I know you gave us a bit of a definition of belonging, but how would you define belonging and why is it important for Black students?
Yes. So I define belonging as acceptance, respect, inclusion, and support. It's a sense of psychological membership that one has to a school environment or a space inside of a school environment. So there's a couple things that are important to understand about belonging. First, there are pockets of affirmation inside of schools where students may be affirmed or may not be being affirmed. And so understanding this, our research led us to do a study where we followed students across multiple subject areas. These were Black and Latino students in an urban middle school. So what we found was that in some cases, their engagement was very high in some classes, but that same student might show dips in engagement in another class, dips and spikes, dips and spikes. This pattern was explained in part by their provision of opportunities to belong that their teacher provided them inside of those classroom spaces. And so, that can look at a few different ways. That can look like, allowing students to express themselves emotionally when they come into class, fuming, mad, and upset, and not ignoring those conditions. Allowing students to learn together. It's one thing to say you're allowing students to be communal by putting students in groups. It's another thing to say, before I put y'all in groups, let's talk about how I want y'all to work together, and, why did you finish your work early, and put your head on the desk as if you're done when you got 3 other group members here? If one of y'all got the answers, y'all all got the answers. So the scaffolding around how to think and work together communally is important as well. Another thing that's important is the opportunity to receive meaningful feedback. Not only, feedback that says, here's what you can improve on, but the assurance that, I believe that you have what it takes to achieve these high standards. It's feedback plus the high standards together that really shows that my teacher really has my back in times of need. In addition to that, sometimes it's just looking out. There's things that teachers might do that are subversive practices that go against the way schools might be structured, or things that they say might be the protocol or ways of doing things, for the sake of really looking out and showing care for a student. Like if a student makes a bonehead mistake and does something wild inside of a school that could get them suspended or expelled, and the teacher has a really firm, stern talk and uses their discretion to understand that this student is not going to commit this again, and I'm going to ensure this, and I'm going to talk to the student and let them know the damaging effects of what they might have done and how this could have went south if somebody else was in this position, not looking out for them. So these are just a couple of things that can be done. And the reason why it's important for Black students in particular, or students from minority backgrounds, is because, when I think about the fact that schools once, let's say in the 50s, 60s, and even before that, said to students, no, physically, you don't belong here. You're not allowed in this space. It's illegal for you to be in this space and in these buildings. So there are historical traces of that in our school today that suggest that students are being tolerated and not celebrated inside of schools. And so students go into schools, rightly so, with a healthy skepticism and their antennas up about whether or not I'm going to be affirmed, and look for signals in terms of whether this place is for me or is not for me. And so when they, these sensitivities make them vulnerable to anxieties about belonging inside of spaces, and without firm connections to teachers in terms of relationships, without connections to their ancestral heritage and community through curriculum, without having a true voice and say about what's going on inside of the school and the way it's run, we run the risk of making them feel like this environment was never intended for them or created for them. And, it just validates their suspicions and ends up, creating a cycle where they choose to disengage, not because they're not able to do well inside of schools, but because, being in this environment doesn't affirm me. So, why am I investing in this place that doesn't affirm me?
Thank you so much. So I want to name one thing and also call attention to another thing, right? So I like that the example that you gave, and I'm just naming it because it's something that we talk about in the course too, right? So you used a restorative practice. The example you gave us about the teacher was using a restorative practice and focusing on relationship and coming back into right relationship with the community, the school community, or the teacher, or whoever might have been harmed in that way, as opposed to like a retributive justice kind of out of the school kind of practice. And I think that that's amazing, excellent, and really embodies the kinds of things that we talk about here. Another thing too, I really like is because schools, one of the invisible ways that we foster Eurocentrism within the schools is through competition. But I like the fact that you spoke about communal practice. I can't say it exactly how you said it, but you said if one of you have it, all of you have the answer. I think that's what you said. And I really like, one, that is bringing back the community and our connectedness and our shared humanity into the space. And so definitely going along with belongingness. But I also really like how consonant that is with the lived experiences of people of color in their homes, right? So in communal, most African descendant, most communities of color are very communal, but there's this whole disconnect once you go into the school system and it's very individualistic or whatever. So I like that there is that continuity. And I also think of universal design in a way when you say this, right? Because it's not just because if we're thinking about Black culture and we're thinking about like communalism and doing that, it's not just the Black students that benefit. It's all community. The people of the global majority are the people of color, right? So the large majority of people benefit from that kind of approach, right? So it might not be labeled as universal design, but it really fits nicely in there because the majority get to benefit through this kind of shared approach. So I like all of what you've had to share with us. So I think we'll stop here, but we're going to continue our conversation a little bit later about what are some actionable kind of strategies that we can do for schools. So thank you so much. I don't know if you had any last words.
No, just one last word about this notion of working together and being communal. There's a lot to unpack in that idea in particular that I hope we can talk about in the future. But one thing to understand is we're teaching students skills, but we also have to understand strengths that they contribute to different groups that they're in. The one example that I'll leave you with is from Remy Ma. I saw an interview that she did on a show with Noriega not too long ago. And, she called one of the producers that she worked with a concept genius. And so she writes all her own rhymes. But what does it mean to just have somebody in the room who gives you that spark? Sometimes the way we think about the way students working in groups and contributing their fair share, makes it so that we don't really appreciate the intangibles that people just add, the energy that somebody adds to the group. And so when we break that up and just think a little more holistically about the groups that students are in and not individually in roles all the time, it opens us up to really contribute true contributions in ways that, are not always easily measured. And so affirming students in that really helps unpack the notion of communalism on a deeper level for them in their group.
Yeah, I like that, just us thinking about every single aspect of it, right? So environmental manipulation, what it is to sit in a circle, how that decenters power from the beginning, from the teacher to the students, between the students, and how that offers and creates like a collective environment as well. And yeah, I can go on and on about like collective and communalism or whatever. but I appreciate all that you've had to share. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you've loved what we've had to say, please press the subscribe button and don't forget to like. We invite you to also follow Dr. Nerissa on Instagram at Dr. Nerissa Williams and learn more about my professional services on liberationrpi.com.